Now, Nicole, listen to me. I don't care what it takes. We're going to finish this today. We're going to finish it. Again, we're not
Well,
extending this to a part 3. We're not extending it to a part 3.
no, we're not. We're finishing it by 11:15.
Okay. Okay. I will make it work. Let's start. Hey everyone, I'm Ben, your underground conductor, and welcome to Underground Cinema. Welcome to part 2 of my But I'm a Cheerleader review. Completely planned. Totally not impromptu based on the fact that we ran out of time last time. But yeah, this is part 2, the discussion portion, and say hi to Nicole, who's returning for it.
Hey there.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is going to be fun. Returning to the topic of But I'm a Cheerleader. It's going to be great. Now, before we get into the discussion, which is going to be, somewhat free-flowing, obviously there's specific points I want to reference, but it's going to be somewhat free-flowing. We're not going to go in sequence of the movie like we did during the synopsis. I did want to offer a concession to you, Nicole.
Okay. What's this
Being
concession?
I think that you were right about Jan.
You think I was right about Jan?
I think you were right about Jan. Upon rewatching the film for a third time, I think you were right about Jan. There's a lot of subtle instances in the film that communicate, oh no, she is a straight girl who is just gender non-conforming.
It's not subtle. It's not subtle.
I honestly thought it was. Like I said before, like a lot of the satire in this film has gone over my head.
She cries, and her line is like, "I just want to have a big fat dick in my," and then what's his name says, "Amen, sister," and that's like a huge part.
It honestly felt like she was in denial the way it was being acted. So, but I concede that I may have been wrong. This is a big step for me, Nicole. It's character development.
One example of a character like this too is in Go Fish, the film that like we went and saw Chasing Amy, and they talked about Go Fish, and I watched that film, and there is these different characters, and there's this one character who is like the lesbian community is like kind of against her, or trying to tell her she's not a lesbian because she
had sex with a man.
She had sex with a man.
Yeah, I know. I've seen Fish. I remember that scene. Yeah.
Yeah. So like it's sort of like, I don't know. This.
I actually
very binary. You referenced it when?
I referenced it in my Chasing Amy review, which I just released after recording last night, because Kevin Smith paid homage to that specific scene in Chasing Amy. Like during the pronoun game scene when Alyssa's talking with her friends and she's sort of dancing around the subject, like that's meant to be an homage to that lesbian trial scene in Go Fish.
Yeah, I think it's just like these assumptions that we make about gender conformity and sexuality, and like we think that they have to. I think I just turned on my TV on accident. I think that we think they have to like correlate, or people think they have to correlate, when it couldn't be farther from the truth.
Well, they don't have to necessarily correlate. And funny thing, there's actually there's a film that came out in 1919. It's called Different from the Others. It's the earliest known feature-length queer film. And in the movie, there's a sexologist character who's played by an actual sexologist named Magnus Hirschfeld. And in the film, he talks about how gender nonconformity and sexuality often correlate, but they also can exist independent of each other.
Yeah, I mean, that's just science. And
well, yeah, but it's astonishing that this was 1919 in Germany.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, there's been tons of research about this and tons of research that has been destroyed or hidden because
Hmm.
of the erasure of the LGBTQ community as a whole.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And this film was one of those instances. This film had a lot of scientific research at the time put into it by Magnus Hirschfeld because he also co-wrote the film. And the Nazis, like the actual Nazis, just like many other books and films, try to destroy every copy of Different from the Others
yeah.
for the exact same reason. But with Jan, yeah, I have to concede I may have been wrong. Although it's interesting because obviously, yes, Nicole, I'm admitting it. But interestingly, the fact that she is gender nonconforming and she was sent to the camp anyway, obviously it plays on the satire that people just assumed that she was a lesbian based on how she dressed, but it also is consistent with the way that these camps are structured because these conversion camps, they weren't just for converting kids into heterosexuals, which obviously didn't work, but they weren't just for that purpose. They were also for socializing people to conform to gender norms.
Yeah.
um
And that's where in like the public brain, like our brains get broken when when those two things aren't correlating, because
mhm.
that's what we've been shown over and over and over again in our media. And what's definitely like pushed down our throats, like from a young age, is you have to be this certain way, especially like if you're a woman, you're expected to like hit these sort of milestones in your life, marriage, kids, blah, blah, blah. If you don't, in a lot of communities still, even in America, you're a little less. You're looked down upon. And it's definitely like those were structured, these places, shoot, what are they called again? Not rehabilitation.
The
What
conversion
is
camps.
conversion camps? These
Yeah.
conversion camps are structured that way because that is what is in our like community brain. Like that's what the people think. That's what the people who are running them, their beliefs, they're
Yeah, they're short-sighted.
short-sighted. They're yeah.
That
They
they
all this knowledge has been this research and everything has been hidden and yeah, definitely
no it
kept from public view. And that's why representation is so important.
yeah. And this film offers that representation obviously, and we see examples of the sort of training in the film, in the montage scenes where characters are all like, oh, rediscover your gender identity. Hey, do the stuff, fix the car, play sports, change babies, do cleaning. Like they're trying to socialize, these kids to adhere to what's expected of them. And as you mentioned, it applies to women, but also broadly applies to men. Because men in modern society, while the same pressure doesn't exist on them to start families per se, there is a lot of pressure on them, to find well-paying careers, to attract women based on status. And obviously achieving success is good, but they're pressured to achieve success just for the sake of attaining status and family. And if they don't, they're also looked down upon. Men are often called slackers, losers, because they aren't doing enough to sort of pursue what's expected of them in life. And obviously I've felt that as a man in my late 20s at this point.
Yeah,
The
I
idea that
mean,
I don't feel far enough in my life.
gender norms suck for everyone. It's not just bad for women, it's also very bad for men.
Yeah, it sucks. There's a joke I often make in my day-to-day life when people talk about whether or not I miss the things I used to do, and I say to them, men don't do what they like. Men get jobs and wives to keep them from what they like.
Okay.
What?
I don't
What?
know. I think the problem is like the getting a wife thing. A lot of men look at getting a wife as just like it's just a support system or a stepping stone to where they need to go. And I think a lot of times when we use like phrase it like that or language like that, a wife isn't a partner anymore. They're just an appendage of the man trying to achieve these goals that he is told that he has to do to be what he's supposed to be in society. And to obtain that, it is easier to have a partner who is helping you obtain that, which is why heterosexuality is like a huge tool for our economic system, and marriage is a huge tool for our economic system, and that's why the government will continue to promote it. But I really do think that there's a problem with gender norms for sure, and men thinking that they have to do everything they can to like achieve this status, even if it's to, you know, crush someone else and crush their dreams and crush their potential to get to where he needs to be.
Oh yeah. You know, so many men are just perfectly willing to work themselves to death, present company included.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
And
just
we,
nice.
Adrienne Rich, she was like a poet and I think kind of a philosopher from like the 70s, 80s, 90s. And she coined this phrase in one of her essays called compulsory heterosexuality, which is
I was about to
basically
ask about that.
we're taught from a young, it's just like in our culture that heterosexuality is the norm and we must participate in it. And again, this goes back to what I was saying, like this tool keeps our world going because women can be used in this like situation where there's a man and wife in a household, and women can be used to do all the free work of childcare and housework, why the man goes and has economic success kind of, but it's for our government, it's for the machine, it's for the cog. So we're both working for the cog. Unfortunately, the wife, the mom, the woman doesn't get paid for her labor, the man does, and they're both part of the same machine though. It's like we're
Wait.
both making the machine work.
Well, it's part of the logic of collectivism versus individualism. And fortunately, you know, in America as well as other Western countries, we prioritize the rights and the wants of the individual. Obviously, like you said, the government is just a machine. All governments are just machines. And as machines, what they try to do is make themselves, you know, self-sustaining. But
I would argue that governments are very patriarchal though, and it's more to sustain the male status. Everything is to keep the male status where it is, because if that breaks down, everything would have to change. And I think everything would change for the better, but it's too scary for men to think about losing that control and that power.
well, it isn't just about power and control. It's also men, generally speaking, sort of have a need to structure things. Men like things being in a specific order because it helps them understand the world around them. You know,
I think that's a human thing. I think it's a human thing and not like a man thing to ascribe to just men.
Well, it is a human thing, but the reason I talk about it in terms of men specifically is because you see this. This is just an observable reality. You see men often engage in compulsory behavior. This is why autism is incredibly prevalent amongst young men, young women as well, but amongst young men, where they become obsessed over a single thing, and it's like, oh, okay, I have to pick this thing apart, figure out exactly how it works. You know, men are really obsessed with sort of figuring out the way structures are constructed, and that also reflects upon me, obviously, because if you've seen any of my reviews, I often like to pick apart the technical aspects of a film, the characters, the film structure, the pacing, how it's shot, how it conveys its theme. I like picking apart the technical aspects because not only because I feel like that's a more honest way to review a film, but also because I like seeing how everything is put together in achieving the primary result. And, you know, this compulsion that men feel, this also is reflected in fiction because, you know, obviously life reflects art, art reflects life, and you see, you know, the archetypes of male characters versus female characters. Male characters often represent order and control in any story, whether they be a protagonist or antagonist. That is the archetype that they fulfill. It's sort of like Taoism, you know, yin versus yang, order versus chaos. The men represent the order.
I think men have written a lot of those stories. Definitely I could ascribe those characteristics to you as an individual. I don't know if you could say as men as a whole have this and women don't as a whole. I think that
Well, I,
women have that same need to figure things out and to figure out their world and to break things down. So I don't think that's a male ascribed attribute. And I don't think that that's also the reason why men should be so scared about holding on to their power or not.
I mean, we could disagree about this, but I'm just saying this is the tendencies that you see not only in real life but also in fiction, and also in regards
I'm
to
just
story.
arguing that that our fiction and our history is very cis white male heavy, and we've studied those, like that's what has been studied in our colleges and universities for so long, and it's only been maybe the last decade where we're getting these new lenses, and certainly it's been more like the past 5 years where we are finally reading. I mean, just what you described, like read some Alice Walker, read more female books, and you will see that the protagonist, it's a protagonist thing. It's not a male or female thing to try to like break things down and solve a problem. We see that in more male characters because most of our stuff is written by males and
I mean,
influenced by males, and that is still how the world is, and we're making our gains more significantly, but what has resided in everyone's brains is kind of what you're saying, and attribute it to a male just kind of it does bristle me up a little. As you know, I get bristled. Because it's unfair. It's like everything we ingest was made is from like a male's point of view, and we have so little from other people's point of view.
I mean, I understand the perspective that you're laying out here, and by all means, send me some of these female creatives, because I'm just fundamentally interested in the story. That's what I'm interested in. But you also do see this in stories that are crafted by women. Probably the most classic example, and people will dispute this obviously because the text specifically was written to appeal to a male reader. But Frankenstein, Mary Shelley. You see the same tendencies in the male characters versus the female characters. The fact that the story is fundamentally about constructing a human body, and that the male character, Victor Frankenstein, is trying to create life when that is not his role. And also, Frankenstein as a text is broadly a metaphor for miscarriage, because Mary Shelley obviously had, I think, like 6 miscarriages in her life.
Yeah, I mean, that brought different lenses to fiction.
Yeah, but like that story comes from a woman's perspective, and it so reinforces this same idea of how men will try to take things apart and figure out how they work before reassembling them.
Sure.
Yeah, and you can also see this reflected in the work of Margaret Atwood, who obviously wrote The Handmaid's Tale.
I mean, her work just shows, I mean, yeah, it shows all of that, but it shows how men think about women.
Yeah, how men think about women, but also how men will construct these systems, these complex systems, to help make things more orderly. And like I said, this is reflective of men who are protagonists and antagonists.
Is it more orderly? Is like in Margaret Atwood's book,
order is inherently authoritarian.
It's orderly to keep them in power. It's orderly to keep their interests in power.
Order is inherently an authoritarian tendency. So yes, it is orderly.
Okay.
Like I said, this is reflected upon protagonists and antagonists. Order can be used as a tool to promote progress, but it can also be used as a tool to promote oppression and tyranny.
Yeah,
like authoritarian governments would not be able to exist if they didn't maintain a strong sense of control by their own nature. That's how they're built.
Yeah, control and fear.
Yeah. That's the point I'm making. That you can also see.
You're also saying that I was right about Jan.
Yeah, I was. So let's get back to the film. After taking that 10-minute detour. I mean, it's an interesting discussion, and you did want to bring up the topic of compulsory heterosexuality. It was the last thing you mentioned in the previous recording.
I know that when I saw this film for the first time, like being this sort of like hidden queer person.
Mhm.
I cried when I saw this for the first time. I was like, how have I never seen this? Like, if I would have saw this as a kid, my mind would have been opened, you know? Like, there was other people like me, and also they made it funny, and also they made it visually funny. So, it was, like, very digestible, you know?
Well, it
It
is very
wasn't like a
digestible.
sad queer story like, you know, we got all the time where the queer person ends up dying from AIDS. This this was different. This was like a happy ending.
Well, yeah, no, it was a happy ending, and like you said, it doesn't adhere to that same stereotype. Like I mentioned, the earliest known queer film is different from the others, and spoiler alert, the character dies in that movie. Obviously, AIDS wasn't a thing yet. He commits suicide, and this is a very
Mhm.
common trope in queer films. And putting aside the fact of whether or not that ending is appropriate for any given narrative, because sometimes it is appropriate for characters to die in a narrative if you're supporting a tragedy. Like that's how Romeo and Juliet ends. Like it is appropriate for
Yeah,
characters
I
to die in that
mean,
setting. But
we're
putting that
both
aside,
into film. We're both into, like, pulling the heartstrings, so I get
yeah,
it. Yeah,
you got it. That's how certain narratives are structured, and you're allowed to do
for
that.
sure.
But the fact that it's such a common trope in queer films specifically, it sort of reinforces this idea that not necessarily being queer is wrong, but queer individuals will often be the victims of either society, which is the case in Different from the Others. The main character kills himself as a result of his social ostracization. They'll either be the victims of society or they'll be the victims of their own hedonism. That
What do
is
you mean
how
their
the
own hedonism? Oh, like overdosing on drugs or something?
overdosing on drugs, overindulging in sex, which will result in the AIDS that you just mentioned.
Uh,
That's
Look,
that's what hedonism is, and I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying this is the tropes that you see in these films.
I mean, you're not saying it's wrong.
It okay? Do you need me to say that? Do you need me to make an obvious statement, despite the fact that I make obvious statements all the time? Yes, it's wrong.
No,
like
I
obvious,
mean,
like obviously every story has its own intended themes and its own intended path that it goes down. Like films are constructed in a particular way, like I just mentioned. But yes, broadly speaking, it is
I just
wrong.
like hate the idea that overindulging and like sex is gonna get you killed. Like
Well, it
there's
can in real life.
yeah, like in the 90s and in real
No,
life, yes. If you're not safe and responsible, for sure.
yeah, and that's
Um,
that's that's with straight people as well. I'm not singling out gay people. I'm just pointing out these are the tropes
yeah,
that you see in queer cinema, and yes, they are wrong. That's what I was getting to. They are wrong. With this
yeah.
film, though, the fact that it does have a happy ending, and I do want to talk about the ending because despite it being a joyful ending, I do have criticisms of it. But the fact that it has a happy ending, it is refreshing when you compare it broadly to the various other queer films that exist. But I want to pivot back a little bit to the film's structure. Like I mentioned during the synopsis that we did last video, I find it very interesting the fact that this film is constructed like a five-step program. Like that is a very
Mhm.
interesting way for the film to break up its pacing. And it helps make the film more digestible, as you said. I've watched this film 3 times since we planned to do this review. That's in addition to the 2 times I watched it in college. So I've seen it a total of 5 times. And you'd expect, a film to, start showing its cracks and seams at a certain point. But this is a very watchable movie, which surprised me. You go on the journey with these characters and see, where they start versus where they end. It really doesn't demand a lot from you in terms of watching it. Like there's a lot of ideas to pick apart, obviously, as we've illustrated, but it doesn't at all like demand a lot from you. This is a very watchable movie. You can just sit down and tune into it. And I'm still astonished that at the time, like when I first saw it 4 years ago, that it all just went over my head.
Yeah, and I think it's comedy, right? Like there's a lot of comedy films where you can just sit down and it's digestible. But you're right about that. You can just like sit and watch this and it's not something that you have to like think about really hard. You can keep up with it. And I agree, like the way that they structured it they sort of followed the story act structure and then with each one of those things like attached sort of a step like you're saying, and I do love that.
Yeah, it's nice. And something I forgot to mention in the synopsis portion is like I said, each step of the program as well as each side tangent from the program is color coded a different color. I forgot to mention that the final test was colored blue. Pink was step 1, admitting you're homosexual. Step 2, rediscovering your gender identity. That was green. Step 3, family therapy. That was yellow. Step 4, demystifying the opposite sex. That was orange. Step 5, the simulated sexual experience. That was also yellow. And the graduation was purple. But I forgot to mention that the final test prior to step 5, that was color-coded blue, which is obviously the stereotypical masculine color in the film.
Yeah.
And once again, this goes along with the concept of mail order, which I referenced.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
I guess it could be interpreted that way for sure.
Well, that's what I love about films, the fact that they're interpretable most of the time.
For sure.
Yeah. But no,
yeah,
I
like,
really...
You're right, though. Yeah, I really like the color thing. And so, like, the beginning, the business as usual was
brown and yellow.
All the beginning stuff. Yeah. Her brown and yellow.
Brown and orange, yeah.
And would you say business as usual was, I guess the inciting incident was when all her family and friends came and told her she's going to camp.
I mean, I think you could argue that that's probably the inciting incident. So typically, like in the first act, I don't remember the exact, because obviously when you write a film, and the writer of this film, I forget his name. I'll put it here. This is the writer of the film. Jamie Babbitt got this particular writer right out of film school because she came up with the initial concept, but because it was her first feature film, she didn't want to fudge the script. So she got a beginning screenwriter right out of film school. And, he probably had film structure fresh in his brain. So I don't remember the exact point that this happens in the film. It could be the actual beginning of the first act, or it could be the introduction of the initial conflict, because the initial introduction of the conflict typically comes halfway through the first act.
Okay.
And then at the end of the actual first act, after you introduce the conflict, you have the loss of momentum.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Would that fit then? It would be the oh my gosh, I can't remember that word, where everyone comes and is going to take you to rehab.
The intervention?
Mm-hmm. My kid just chimed in and told me it's intervention. Yeah. That's why I'm like, I feel like the intervention is the inciting incident, but also, is it step 1 where she's like, yes, or she's like, I am a homosexual?
I think, yes, it is. And I think step 1 would probably be the end of act 1, because that is her loss of momentum as a character. Like, obviously, I rewatched the film like 3 days ago, but I don't, I didn't like bookmark each part of the film, because it's very easy to actually track the exact like moments in each act of a film, in a traditionally structured film, obviously. In almost any film you watch, with exceptions for experimental films and esoteric films, you can directly track exactly where the story beats are based on the minute count of the film. Like, the way films are cut together and the way they're written, it's very easy to track them. If you try.
So then the midpoint escalation of this one, I think, is when they go to the bar.
It is, because that's when Graham and Megan hook up for the first time. It's the peak in the narrative.
Yeah.
Well, they don't hook up, they kiss, which And obviously they're shrouded in red because she's angry at first, but as you mentioned in our synopsis, red is also a color of passion, and that's meant to also represent passion that the two of them are sharing in that moment.
Yeah. And then oh, go ahead.
No, go on.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. And continuing on with the color scheming, something I find interesting is the fact that obviously this is a conversion camp. All the kids are being pressured into conforming to gender norms and traditional sexuality. I just find it funny, though, and I don't know how I didn't think about this, because I was so focused on, because I guess I was just so focused on the technical aspects of the color scheming that, it completely went over at my head. The house is literally a rainbow. Like, they go from a boring brown suburban area to actually a rainbow house.
Yeah,
So,
and it's like
yeah.
in the middle. It looks like it's built in Hemet, like by where I grew up. Like it's nothing. It's all brown, and then there's this Victorian house that's painted rainbow colors, and
It's
funny.
so fun. It's so funny. Like it's literally a gay house that they're trying to make an anti-gay house. It's
the best.
so fun. Yeah. Do you want to get more into the production design, because I know it interested you a lot?
I love the production design. I kind of feel like we're talking about it a lot. I was just gonna say, for like the low point, I feel like it's when the parents come visit, and they're in that room, like kind of in a horseshoe, but they feel like, when you said the word like pressure, that's like what that scene felt like, is like the pressure. And there's this low point where the kids are kind of just not being supported by their parents. This is where you see Jan drop off, and like some of the kids run away to the other safe house. And this is where Graham is like given this ultimatum. And yeah, I feel like you could really feel it. The production design on this is so visceral. Like you feel it in each scene. It's like so on purpose. I love it. But I could
really
definitely feel it at this low point, you know, and then Graham like watches her parents just drive away, and she's on the porch in this rainbow house.
Yeah. It is just very impactful, and it's also interesting how, and this sort of relates to, the focus of the film that I kind of want to talk about. At a certain point, it feels like Megan stops being the protagonist and Graham becomes the protagonist, which you see in films from time to time where they'll swap characters. Like this happens in the original Alien, where the first half of the film focuses on the captain of the Nostromo, Dallas. But once Dallas goes, I think he gets taken by the alien and turned into an egg in the director's cut of Alien. Ripley becomes the main character.
And is that maybe because the main character cares about them so much, so now we care about them so much?
I think that's definitely the framing, because obviously
I feel like it is in this. I feel like we care about Graham now. I mean, Graham is cool, so we always cared about her. But when Megan falls for Graham, and you like feel that, then you're even like pulling more for Graham. You want that for Megan.
Exactly. And it's because obviously this is, even though it's a satire, it's also in a sense a rom-com. Like, you're rooting for the couple to end up together, just based on how the film is framed. Although, and while I still have it in my mind, I did look up Clea Duvall's tattoo.
Oh, you did?
I did.
Okay, is it?
So there's an entire, it's odd. There's an entire webpage devoted to her tattoo, which is weird.
I'm not surprised. Not surprised.
It's specifically, there's so many pictures of her, and I'm like, what did you guys do? What did you guys do? But they're all just showcasing images of her Mandarin tattoo amongst the other tattoos that she has, but primarily the Mandarin tattoo. But yet there's no translation of it. So I went online and I just asked people who were really into tattoos, because typically people who are into tattoos know Mandarin. That way they don't get screwed over by a tattoo artist, which happens a lot. Because tattoo artists will just write a joke, typically in Mandarin, and it's like, haha, look what I did. And apparently her tattoo says star, which is pronounced Hoshi in Mandarin, which I think is symbolic. Yeah, which I think is, supposed to be symbolic of the fact that Graham is the star of the movie. Like
I don't know.
Like I did there. I mean, I'm not joking. That's what the tattoo actually says.
Yeah. That's cool though. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all the people in the film like really were incredible. Like RuPaul is he not the star of the show? Is he not the star? I mean, come on.
RuPaul is great in this movie. Like he's really great. And this actually pivots to what I want to talk about, the performances. Obviously RuPaul is great. I think the actress from Mary, I forget her name. Let me just look it up. Like I said, I'm tired of pretending like I know everything. I'm developing, Nicole.
The actor she's in a lot of things now.
Give me a second.
She's in Hornets, or what is it? Yellow Jackets. Oh no, I'm thinking of Hillary. I was thinking of Hillary. Melanie Linsky, who played Hillary, is like just popping off right now. She's in everything.
Oh yeah, she's great. Here we go. Kathy Moriarty. Kathy Moriarty plays Mary, and she's great in this movie. She's really good. And something I find interesting about her character, I wanted to discuss this, is like you mentioned in our previous video, there are aspects about her sexuality that it's like, well, exactly what is she? Because there's things that come out in her dialogue, in the language that she uses, that seems oddly sensual in a homosexual sense. And it's like, okay, is she gay? Is she a closeted gay? Is she bi? Is she hetero? Because she also seems like aggressive in the way that she wants people to, conform to heterosexuality. And obviously there's that line during the step 5 scenes where she says that foreplay is for sissies.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that she's just like the more you lean into like hetero masculine, like all these tropes, like it kind of circles back and becomes very gay again.
Yeah, like I said, like when you go to these extremes, they just loop around.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I find her character incredibly fascinating, and like also the fact that her last name is Brown goes along with the color scheming of heteronormativity in this film, which is funny. But I also like her son is gay, and a question I had while I was rewatching the film is, first of all, how old is her son? Because I assume that he's probably around the same age as the other kids. But also, like, he probably grew up in this environment, and there's a lot of interesting questions to be had. Like, how long has Mary been, doing this conversion camp? Like, when did she start doing this? Like, was it when she discovered her son was gay, or did she do it beforehand, before her son went through puberty, or before her son was born? And is this an ironic twist for her? And has her son gone through this program before?
Maybe they'll make a show about Mary like they did about Nurse Ratched.
Yeah, maybe. It'd be interesting.
We'll get her backstory.
Yeah, we'll get her backstory. It'd be interesting. But that is definitely something I noticed, and something I had questions about. And I also like I mentioned in the previous video, she also has no husband. She has no man in her life. So that makes me wonder what happened here. Did her husband die? Did her husband leave her because maybe he's gay?
Why does she have to have a husband?
She has a son.
Yeah, but she could have had him
like,
out
did
of
she have a random hookup?
She doesn't say she believes in marriage. She just thinks that
she's an advocate.
That's it.
She's an advocate for inherently. Her character is an advocate for heteronormativity. Her character is an advocate for traditional gender roles. So it seems intuitive that she would have had a husband at some point. They just never referenced one in the film. And who knows? Maybe she just had a random hookup with a guy in a bar.
I think that's on purpose. I think the wrestling with like what is Mary about is on purpose, because I think you can argue like she's this strong-willed woman who thinks she's doing the right thing for these kids, and also she does kind of do it like with her son. She acts annoyed, but she doesn't say anything. Like everything she says comes out of this real concern that you can tell that she like really believes. There's no like degrading these kids for no reason. But there were some instances where she's very matter of fact about like what she believes. I'm trying to think of one instance where she just kindly corrects them. Yeah, she kindly corrals them back to hetero when things are getting a little gay.
Yeah, well, kindly. She puts kids in doghouses.
Right.
Yeah. That's very kind. It's very kind of her. Yeah. But no, I find her character very interesting. Like, so many of the characters in this movie just have layers that you can dig into. But this also gets into something that I really want to discuss that I have criticisms about in the film. So like I said, when I first saw this film, 4 years ago, when I put it in the original underground cinema screenings, I told you that I thought it was bad. And it's because a lot of the satire went over my head. And
we had to have a fist fight. And
exactly. We did fisticuffs. But upon rewatching the film, I'm like, this is really good. This is really funny. And it's because I was able to, since I have more life experience now, I was able to actually pick apart the satire and see all the stereotypes. This film obviously plays around with stereotypes a lot, like any good piece of satire should. Obviously a great example of this would be like Coonskin, which, thank you for this copy. I remember when you gave this to me. Turns 50 this year, by the way.
Does it?
Yes. Yeah, but yes, it does. But Ralph Bakshi's Coonskin is a very dense piece of satire, and it's plays around with racial stereotypes so much, as well as gay stereotypes and gender stereotypes, that people actually legitimately thought at the time that it was a bigoted film, that it was racist, that it was homophobic, that it was sexist. But it is such a dense piece of satire. The way that they play around with the black characters in this film, the fact that they're all basically menstrual caricatures, but also animals. The fact that the gay characters are nearly outed in the film and they're shown having sex in a dumpster, I think. The fact that the most prominent female character in the film, Miss America, is meant to be a broader metaphor for our government and how our government will screw over black people. Like, it's very dense satire, and people were legitimately offended by it, as they should be, because it's satire. But they also thought it was, sincere. That wasn't satire. And I'm like, if you've seen Coonskin, it is very obvious that no one would have made this film if they were playing it straight.
Yeah.
Like, especially in that era.
It would have been awful.
It would have been awful. I mean, I guess Song of the South exists, but...
Well, that's legit awful. Like, and this is... Coonskin is different.
Coonskin is different. Ralph Bakshi was a genius. But, like, But I'm a Cheerleader plays around with very similar stereotypes. And... it's kind of odd because it's all sexual stereotypes, which makes sense. The movie's about in a conversion camp, but like the movie's also, incredibly diverse, and that's by design. It was casted to be deliberately diverse, and that was done specifically by Jamie Babbitt because she felt like she had to fight for representation in this film, not just queer representation, but representation in general. Apparently, the first casting choice for this film wasn't Natasha Lyonne. I believe the first casting choice was Rosario Dawson.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And the producer, whose name I do not remember, the producer told Babbitt that you need to hire a white woman for this film to reinforce like these traditional American ideas. And on the one hand, I understand that because that also plays into the satirical element of the film, but like, seriously?
Yeah, that's a shame. I mean, Natasha Lyonne is amazing and I love her so much, but yeah, it was of the time too. Like, it sucks and it's still like that for a film to sell and to be marketed, your leads have to be white, and I'm hoping it's not like that anymore. But we do have to recognize that when this film was made, that is what the financial backers insisted on. I mean, we both learned this in film school, and it's unfortunate, and I hope things change like faster because everything that like I'm working on these TikTok videos and the TikTok feature films that people watch, these like romance silly films, and the backers want these white leads predominantly, and it sucks. It's still kind of like that.
It does suck. Things are obviously changing now, and to play devil's advocate, film is kind of the only industry where you're allowed to be discriminatory with your casting because you're casting a specific type for different roles. Like if you're telling a story, for instance, about the Black experience in America, if you're doing Do the Right Thing, you're not going to cast a white guy in the lead of Do the Right Thing.
Right.
I mean, I'm
exactly.
sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure if, Spike Lee had sold the film to a major studio before he started production, they probably would have tried to do that. But you're not going to do that. You're not going to do that. You're going to cast a Black person because that is what's appropriate for the story. So in that sense, the discriminatory casting, there's a legitimacy to that, but you can take it steps too far. It's very easy to take it steps too far because it is inherently discriminatory the way you cast films by design. You have to. But, like you said, Natasha Lyonne, she's appropriate for this role. The fact that a lot of this film is from her point of view being opened up to as a, she's discovering aspects of homosexuality as she goes, which is very intelligent framing, obviously, because she doesn't realize that she's a lesbian at the beginning of the film. And the fact that she's so coy throughout it, and she comes off as, very bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, it works for this particular narrative. But the reason I thought the film was bad at the time is because I felt like a lot of the performances were hokey. And obviously, I understand now that that was by design. And everyone in this film, does great sort of playing off of that because it's supposed to be funny. But even upon rewatch, it felt like wait, what's going on with Natasha Lyonne? Like, that's how I felt while rewatching the film. It's like, what's going on with her? Because rewatching it, I thought to myself, is she the weak link in this film? She's the main character. How is she the weak link? Because that does happen with films occasionally, where the main character is just the weak link in the narrative. But then looking at her performance, there's so many subtle instances, particularly in her facial performance, that communicates, oh, she's actually doing a really good job. So why does she feel underwhelming? And I think it is the case that she's sort of overshrouded by the other characters in the story. Like, this is a very dynamic narrative. And obviously, the way the film is framed, she has to be the POV for the viewer. Like, she has to be that particular entry point for someone watching this film who maybe isn't familiar with the queer experience. So she has to be framed like that, but she also feels like a very weak character who's being dragged through the narrative instead of having her own agency. That is until the end of the film, when she obviously leaves the conversion camp. That's the only point in the film, at the end of Act 2, where she feels like she has genuine agency. From that point forth, it feels like she's making active decisions in the story, but she doesn't up until that point. She gets dragged around by people. She gets dragged to the conversion camp. She gets dragged to that gay bar, the cocksucker. She constantly gets pushed around by other characters in the story, and it makes her character feel weak as a consequence. And I think that's probably why the first time I watched this film, like, I felt like it was lacking, because the main character doesn't feel prominent enough, you know?
I can totally see that. I would push back and say that you're right about, like, her character. She doesn't know, like, about herself. She's not secure within herself, or she didn't understand that there was this thing wrong with her, and now she's being told this thing is wrong with her, and she does have to develop through that. I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she went from being pulled to these activities and not making her decisions, but that's kind of what makes the payoff at the end, where she is doing this grand gesture for Graham, this cheer, that she, like, comes out of herself, like, comes out of that shell and makes this, like, she ran away to the, what was the camp called? The
True
safe,
Directions.
True Directions. No, what was the safe one?
That was just Lloyd and Larry's house. I don't think they had a name.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Lloyd and Larry, she, like, made that decision. That was huge, especially after her parents told her that, they weren't
gave her
going
an
to be.
ultimatum. You can't come home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I felt like that made the payoff for that decision. You could feel like that was hard for her to make that decision, and it was hard for her to do this grand gesture for Graham.
Yeah. And I agree that that's very powerful for her character, but it also comes very late in the narrative. Mm-hmm. So it feels like, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of build up to that decision in particular, It doesn't feel like she makes small decisions throughout the film that prompt her to make that big decision by the end of the second act. It feels like she's been forced out, and now she's making decisions. And to be fair, that does happen in real life, but in a narrative sense, it doesn't really feel like, oh, well, this is kind of late. It didn't feel like there was build up to her becoming more active in the third act, And while we're talking about, character decisions, a big problem I have with this film, and this was very apparent to me after you and I rewatched it, and after I rewatched it 2 more times, the fact that there's no catharsis for any other character aside from Graham and Megan. It feels weird because of how prominent the side characters are in this story.
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, this film was casted deliberately to be diverse. There's a Jewish character, there's 2 Latin characters, there's Hillary's character, who's like the nerd of the group. There's Dante Bosco, who's a Filipino. Obviously, RuPaul, he's a black man. It's casted deliberately to be diverse, and that was done by Babbitt to protest against, discrimination on the film. But that also helps to make the characters feel distinct. And the fact that we get to know each of them throughout the film, we get to understand why they're there, why they're like that. They feel very dynamic in the story, which once again minimizes Megan's role in the narrative, but I've already talked about that. But they feel very dynamic in the narrative. And by the end of the story, it feels like the film forgets about a lot of their stories. Jan runs away, obviously, before Act 2 ends. And we never see her again. The characters of Hillary and Joel stay for the graduation, but we don't see what happens to them after. Andres gets kicked out of camp after the final test because he doesn't pass. Obviously, Dolph and Clayton, those 2 end up together after Megan and Dolph go on their rescue.
Yeah. So at least those two.
Those two have something, but it feels shoved in. It feels like, oh, well, these two were hooking up earlier in the film, so it feels like we should tie their stories together. And obviously, I love the fact that they use Dante Bosco after he leaves the camp, because I love Dante Bosco. But it feels like sort of tacked on. It feels like they did it because they had to, because the character was still around. And it's like, okay, we can't just have him support Megan. He also has to do something for himself. It feels like there's not a lot of catharsis for these characters that we really got to know throughout the film. And it's like, what the hell? All these characters were very well defined. They were well acted. They were given discernible characteristics. We got to know each of them as people. And then it feels like the film forgets about almost all of them.
Do you think that's because it was maybe because it was indie, low budget film?
Well, it was indie low budget. The film was only $1 million. And to be fair, how many kids were there? Let's say 6. I don't know the actual number. Let's say it's 6 kids.
And it's also the comedy formula. You don't always get to find out what happens to everyone. Where when you have an epic, when you have Armageddon, the movie, they're gonna show you at least after the credits that everyone's okay and who's with who. But I think for this little indie film and in the queer community, not everyone's gonna be okay.
Well, that is, yeah.
We're lucky if 4 out of 10 kids make it to realize, to self-actuate and own who they are and be okay with themselves. We're lucky if that happens out of 4 out of 10 kids, especially at that time when this was made. So maybe that was on purpose, that those kids probably didn't get a happy ending. We saw what they were going to go home to. And I think that is something, as a director, I would be okay with my audience going home and thinking about, because I want them to go home and think about that and care about that.
You see, I would agree with you. If it weren't for the fact that, Dolph and Clayton do get an ending in the film. Like I said, that aspect of the film feels tacked on, and I do love that Dante Bosco sticks around in the movie. But the fact that element, it feels tacked on, says to me that, and obviously I don't know Natasha Lyonne, and I also I don't know if there's a director's commentary for this movie. I don't have the Blu-ray. I just have the DVD. What?
So maybe there is. We should find it.
I'll look for it. Maybe we can do a 30-year reappraisal in 5 years. But it feels like to me, if you're in the process of making this film and you have these characters that you have left behind, it feels like you'd ask yourself, okay, how do we wrap this up? Because we should have shot ourselves in the foot because we had too many characters and we made them too dynamic. They weren't just there in the story. They had actual stake, and we don't have endings for most of them. So, but who knows? Maybe it was intentional. Like you said, maybe it was something that Jamie Babbitt wanted us to think about outside the theater. Yeah, sure, Megan and Graham get a happy ending, but what about the other kids? Maybe that was something that she wanted to think about. I don't know. I'm just saying, to me, it feels like there wasn't catharsis for the whole film because there were, character stories that were dropped,
Yeah, you care about those characters. They wormed their way into your heart because it's good. They were good. They acted so well. And the actors that they cast were perfect.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. But yeah, that would be my argument, is they got you to care about them, and you have to take that with you after you see this movie, so that you think about that when you encounter other queer people, or you encounter legislation that's taking rights away from gay people. Maybe you'll worry about what happened to Jan.
I mean, yeah, that's fair. It gives us something to think about. But anyway, let's see what's left. Oh, this is a topic that I wanted to cover before we ended.
Okay.
Yeah. So something I find interesting is that when, like you said, this film sort of avoids the pitfalls of other queer films, not just because it's a satirical comedy, but because it actually has a happy ending. But something that this film also does, which I found interesting, and I noticed it while I was watching it, while the film does make fun of traditional femininity, it doesn't undermine it, which I found interesting. Megan is a traditionally girly girl, and that was intentional. I looked into it, and apparently, what Jamie Barrett was attempting to do when she made this film partially was, create sort of representation for the femme lesbian experience, the lipstick lesbian experience. Because up until that point, a lot of the lesbian films that had come out throughout the 90s were, butch lesbian stories. Like,
that's where, like, I think she's trying to play with Jan's character, is just because you look butch doesn't mean you are, or just because you look femme doesn't mean you're not a lesbian.
Exactly. And the fact that she plays around with that in this film, I find interesting because, she had seen Go Fish and she had seen The Watermelon Woman, which both play around with the butch lesbian archetype, but she wanted to explore the femme lesbian experience. And like you said, it's unexpected. Megan is a girly girl, but she isn't straight. And I think the fact that the movie ends with her doing a traditionally feminine thing, cheerleading, to win the heart of Graham, I think speaks volumes and shows how, even though, her life has been sort of transformed, that she hasn't fundamentally changed as a person. Despite discovering something new about herself, she's still the same person she's always been. There's just more to her now. And that doesn't mean that she has to give up something she enjoys, like cheerleading or like being traditionally feminine. And I like that aspect of the film. The fact that it doesn't discourage being traditionally feminine, which I feel like a lot of projects, do, because, we live in an age now where we are sort of raging against traditional gender roles, like we are in that
but
sort
I think
of time now.
I think it's important though for women to still be able to, like, claim femininity, and men too. We can't say femininity is bad in any regard.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's not.
And I like that the film doesn't do that. The film shows that, it's okay to be girly. It's okay to like cheerleading and like makeup and whatever. Like, you're allowed.
And it just shows that you can grow up like that and love those things, and you can still end up being a lesbian. Like, she had parents that did all the right things, and they were supportive and lovely parents, until they started to get worried about her being a lesbian. And, I really liked that too. I agree with you that, and that's the title, but I'm a cheerleader, like this typical, I don't like to say typical, but like what we've grown up to see in America, the American girl can still be a lesbian, and it's not the way she was raised. It's not always these outside influence. It's just how you're born. It's just innately in you, and it's okay.
Yeah, that is okay. That is okay. And it doesn't mean that you have to, be sent to camp, because like, you are who you are. You should enjoy that aspect of yourself. And while I remember it, I did look into this because neither of us knew last time whether or not there was a national ban on conversion camps. So so I checked. There is currently no national ban on conversion camps, which is kind of wild. The fact that we've gone through 5-6 presidential administrations since this movie came out, and there's been no leeway on that at all. But they are banned in about half of U.S. states, and maybe the fact that they're, and I don't know, I'm not a constitutionalist. Maybe there's a states' rights issue in regard to the federal government attempting to ban them. That could be a problem.
It is because I think I was following the news on this, like, when I first left the Mormon church, and it was only a few years ago that the Mormon church's conversion camps were all shut down. But I think it's a states issue where states are still uneasy about that.
I mean, they're uneasy about it. And, to be fair, like, states' rights are baked into our Constitution, and that's by design. That way the federal government doesn't do anything stupid like, I don't know, deploy the military into, an urban city. That'd be pretty bad.
I also wouldn't, I also wouldn't be surprised if the states that are trying to strip women's rights away are also these states that just can't ban these terrible conversion camps. So
well,
I wouldn't be surprised if they correlate.
Well, that's the thing. I checked, and they're only banned in about half of U.S. states.
And I'm saying, I bet that half is the ones that are also have abortion bans on the on the legislation.
I mean, that's possible. I don't have I don't have the map to show you. I'll put it in the video. I'll put the ban map. I'll put the band map in the video. But,
and if I'm right, because you also be like, see, and Nicole guessed right.
Well, I'm not disagreeing with you.
But it's kind of an educated guess. I know you're not disagreeing with me.
Yeah, I'm not
saying we don't have the facts, and I totally did pull that out of my ass because
you're making a blanket assumption based on
I am. I'm making a basic assumption. Has this been distracting the whole time?
It's actually been kind of cool. The fact that there's been a windy sort of curtain in the background, it makes you look more dynamic. I enjoy that.
I look ethereal.
Yeah, exactly. Very ethereal. Yeah. But I just want to bring that up. They are banned in about half of U.S. states, and I also feel like it is important to bring up that obviously that sounds really bad. The fact that only half of U.S. states go out of their way to ban these camps. But I also feel like it is important to bring up that when you talk about statistics like this, or you talk about statewide legislation like this, it's important to bring up the fact that things are only banned typically when they're a problem. And what I mean by that is it could be the case, and obviously this is me being very optimistic, but it could be the case that the reason some states, not all states certainly, but the reason some states don't have these bans is maybe because some states just don't have the camps. It's sort of like how when after the Great Depression in the 1930s, when President Roosevelt was drafting the New Deal, part of the New Deal, I believe, was putting a nationwide ban on child labor, which, obviously that's good. That sounds great. But at the time, child labor in America had already basically vanished. Society had already moved on from child labor at that point. So while having nationwide legislation on child labor was fundamentally good, it was kind of unnecessary in the sense that most states weren't doing it anymore. In fact, the last children who were working in labor roles by the time the New Deal was passed were children working on their parents' farms.
But as we can see, if you don't fight for that right to make it a law, that it can come back around. Child labor is back. Back on the docket. Why are we even trying to do that?
Well, the reason child labor is back on the docket, obviously, is because of COVID and how a lot of adults quit their jobs after COVID. So, obviously it was called the Great Resignation. So there's, a severe lack in the American workforce. So
right, but to make kids work, I don't know about that. But I know you're not arguing. I am saying, with these conversion camps, I know that there are LGBTQ coalitions and lobbyists and groups that definitely fight to get these things banned in every state, and the state most likely is making the choice to not ban it and using it hasn't been a problem as an excuse to not ban it. That would be what I think, because there's no reason, if you knew what happened in these camps, and if you knew what it does to a human spirit, you would not send a child there, or a human being at all, to tell them that they are fundamentally wrong. And we should just know that by now in 2025. But
like I said, I feel like most people do know that, but obviously it's the governments that are the problem.
It's the religious right and the Bible Belt, and that is where conversion camps will still be allowed.
Yeah, well,
along
it's funny
with abortion bans.
Well, it's funny because obviously you are correct that these camps are prevalent in more religious areas. Although it's funny because, obviously I don't have the map in front of me, but in some religious states they have banned these camps, and the reason they banned them is because, for lack of better terms, I'll call it funny. It's because oftentimes these camps are sued for fraud, because parents will send their children to these camps and it's like, okay, we'll fix your kid, and
and it doesn't work.
it doesn't work. So they sue the camps for fraud, and that's a lot of the reason why the bans occur, because it's like, oh, well, you've misadvertised yourself.
And these kids will sometimes harm themselves worse, and you know, and the suicide rate goes up, and it's not okay. Like, we should take all of that data into consideration and definitely ban these conversions.
No, I definitely agree with you. I just find it interesting that it's a lot of it is fraud motivated, which I find interesting. Anyway, obviously
that does not surprise me.
It is not surprising at all. Now, obviously, we should wrap this up. Let me just look over my notes here to see if there's any final points I want to talk about.
I was checking to see if Utah had any more conversion camps.
So I know that they're not banned there. I know that.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, if they were banned yet.
Like, I remember looking at the map, and I remember checking Utah specifically. They are not banned there, but I don't know if they have them. That's, like I said, the map only shows bans. It doesn't show whether or not the camps are being practiced in the individual states.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, that's something. I might have mentioned this last recording. I may have not. I just find it ironic that they're all like, "Hey, we're worried about our kids being gay, so let's put a bunch of kids who are gay together in one place and see what happens." Like, that's just an ironic aspect of conversion camps that a lot of people don't consider. It's like, oh my god, my child is sexually confused. What do I do? Put them with a bunch of other children who are sexually confused? That seems like a great idea.
But that's the thing too. Okay, what was I always just want to call him Rufio. What's the actor's name who ran away to the... Yeah, Dante Bosco. Okay, that's another reason why I feel like I liked his storyline, and that he sort of motivates or sets the example for Megan, but also goes to your point of she needed help as a character to be pulled along. But that's what happens when you find your queer community. Like, you see other people like yourself, it validates who you are, and yeah, it ends up being like this encouraging, wonderful thing to meet other queer people. So
yeah,
I feel like you're right. That's the opposite of what they would want to happen.
Yeah, it's just very ironic. And obviously that doesn't negate the fact that these camps are horrible and we should stop using them. But it's just, the irony is thick, and the fact that it does apply to real life situations I find funny. Which also reminds me of another point. So I brought up in the last video how I thought it would have been funnier if Megan wasn't gay. Everyone just kept on assuming that about her because of her tendencies. And I do think that'd be funny, but that was also the premise of a South Park episode. There was a South Park episode where Butters is sent to a conversion camp because Butters' dad catches him with Eric Cartman, who is a monster, obviously. Like, the character is written to be the worst person ever. And he's basically tricking Butters into doing something gay because Eric Cartman did something gay. So he thinks that by making Butters do something gay, it will balance things out. And also by taking a picture of it. Anyway, Butters' dad catches them together, and Butters' dad sends him to a conversion camp because he's like, "Oh, son, this isn't a problem. You're just a little bi-curious." Never mind the fact that Butters was blindfolded during the sexual act in question. But he sends Butters to a conversion camp, and Butters isn't actually gay. He's very confused the entire time about why he's there. But by the end of the episode, he gives this beautiful speech about how he isn't confused. He only started getting confused when other people told him he was confused, and that he thinks they're actually confused.
Yeah.
Which is quite encouraging. So if you want to watch sort of a parallel version of But I'm a Cheerleader, where the main character actually isn't gay, but everyone thinks they are, South Park episode.
Sweet.
Yeah. Let's see. We already touched on the female gaze during the last video. I just find it funny that, this is a very sexually positive film. This is very much a pro-sex film, which obviously I'm in favor of. And I do find it interesting the fact that the film does play on the concept of the female gaze in the way that we, show women's bodies in films.
Yeah, but we already talked about that a lot.
We discussed it. I'm just touching on it.
I had to get off at 11:15, and it is 11:45.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm wrapping up. I'm just reading into other things to see if I brought them up. But yeah, we already discussed that. Okay. This is just a question I had in the film. Did Sinead, the goth girl, plant the matchbook on Graham, because it seems it's implied in the film that she did, but it's not made explicit, you know?
Oh yeah, I never picked that up.
Yeah,
but
because
that would make sense. That would make more sense. Because I
yeah,
feel
because
like my
jealous.
first thought when she found it was like, oh, how could Graham be so dumb? Like, she wouldn't do that. But I wonder if we see someone get the matchbook before or something.
I don't think we do. I've seen the film 3 times, but I could always miss something. Mary just finds the matchbook under Graham's bed, and in the night before, when they go to the bar, the cocksucker, Sinead is trying to hook up with Graham, but Graham's not into Sinead. Graham is into Megan, and then Sinead sees Graham and Megan kiss. So it just makes me wonder if Sinead did that out of spite, especially since she's a spiteful character. We see that throughout the film.
100.
So that's just a question I had. It's not made explicit in the film, and it doesn't have to be. You don't have to explain everything. That's just a question I had when I was watching the movie. And,
or it could have been like edited out, you know, like maybe it was a moment in the bar, but it has to get cut or something.
Exactly. I'll sift back through the film later.
Because it like probably still made sense, and you still came to that conclusion, and I think that's an easy conclusion to come to, because she is spiteful.
Yeah, she is spiteful, and that's that's just a point I wanted to bring up. It isn't a critique; it's just a question I had, and this is an interesting aspect of the film I wanted to bring up before we wrap up, and I bring up the final point. I find it interesting how, with the exception of Graham's dad, every antagonist in this film is a woman. I just found that interesting. Because traditionally speaking, in a lot of these films, and it's not always the case, obviously, but in a lot of these films, you see that the homophobic antagonists are men. Like, you see that. And, Graham's father in this film definitely fulfills that archetype of the homophobic, rich white guy, like, very explicitly. But, there's also Graham's stepmother, who, sort of like the gold-digging type, shitty stepmom, fairy tale type, etc. She fulfills that archetype. And there's also Mary, obviously, who runs the camp, and she's a very complex and interesting character. And there's also Megan's mom. Like we mentioned in the previous video, Megan's dad is sort of a pushover. He's very passive-aggressive. Megan's mother is the more active one in the relationship, and she's the one who initially pushes forward the ultimatum to Megan. So I just find it funny that this film, and obviously this film was, directed by a woman, and the concept originally came from a woman. But I just find it interesting that, she frames most of the antagonists from the feminine perspective.
Yeah, and I think that internalized misogyny and internalized homophobia comes out in those women, because the women can be antagonists too.
Well, I don't even think it's necessarily internalized misogyny or internalized homophobia, except for maybe in the case of Mary, because Mary's character is so ambiguous. It might be internalized homophobia, because her character, she's interesting. She's actually interpretable. But it's also like women can be the bad guy sometimes. Like there's an exploitation film that came out in 1990 called Caged Fury. That's about a bunch of women locked in a fake prison, forced to make porno films. Terrible film, by the way. Like, it's well directed, but it is nasty to watch. And the warden of that prison is a dominatrix.
Well, I just think that not only men are homophobic, and so we're in this society where we're all taught compulsory heterosexuality is the way, like the right way, the only way. And so it doesn't even faze me that a woman wouldn't also internalize this and act that way. It doesn't faze me at all, especially because the way that Mary acts is a demented motherly way, is how she is sort of controlling and corralling these kids.
Yeah, and obviously that plays into the classic narrative archetype of the overbearing mother, which you see in films from time to time. I think probably the most classic example is maybe Carrie. Yeah. But that's I think that's all the points I wanted to bring up. Obviously, I always forget at least one thing, but this is something I don't want to forget, and something I want to ask you specifically to wrap up. So obviously you mentioned that when you first watched this film, it sort of put you in awe of the fact that it did have a happy ending, and that it was a queer film that showed not only a positive representation of the queer experience, but didn't undermine it with a tragic ending. so obviously that aspect spoke to you about the film, but why is this film in particular so important to you? Why is it one of your favorites?
I think it's one of my favorites because it was definitely like those women are the same age as me. I was that age when that film was made, but I didn't see it until I was older.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing like even those kids in the film be able to be a little more free, like Graham was a little more free with how she felt, and she was sure of herself and sure that she liked women. I think seeing that young people could be so sure of themselves was like, oh my gosh, like I didn't even have that option. And Megan's experience was so real to me because she's just like going through life with this boyfriend and she just thinks this is how it is. And I could totally relate to that. Like I was just like, this is how it is. This is, until you realize that's not how it is. And there's more options. And then it's like, yeah, that's very visceral for me to like see her journey for sure. And more so just that there was films out there for kids like me and I didn't have access to them. Because of the way that I was brought up. I was not allowed to watch movies like that. So yeah, I hope more and more films like that are being made. And that is why representation is hella important.
Okay. That I think that about wraps it up. Yeah, no, that's that makes perfect sense why this film spoke to you like that. And it's also aged phenomenally well. Not only is it still consistent with LGBT values, but it's also funny still. Like I was cracking up when you and I watched it. It's a really good film. Like I mentioned earlier, it's very easy to watch. It has a lot of rewatch value. It has flaws. I've brought up my gripes in this video, but like it is a rock solid film. I would definitely recommend But I'm a Cheerleader. And like you said, this is probably a good introductory film for young people who are questioning themselves. And that was also Babbitt's intent, that she wanted young people to sort of be able to discover this film and see that, they weren't alone, that it was okay if they weren't considered quote unquote normal.
Yeah.
And it's very encouraging. It's a very encouraging thing. And now this section is just as long as our last section.
I know.
But
and she does it with jokes. I was just going to say it's funny, and she does it with jokes and visual gags, and that makes it the best. That's my jam. That's why I loved it.
Yeah.
And nobody died of AIDS, and nobody lost their kids because they were gay, and it was happy.
Yep, and there was only one traumatic bris.
There was only one traumatic bris.
There was only one traumatic
bris. My favorite line, I think, still is when Graham says, "My mom got married in pants." And that was her dramatic. I love that so much. I'm going to carry that with me forever.
Sometimes you have to carry those lines with you forever. It's like, what? It's great. But yeah, that was our review of But I'm a Cheerleader. Well, half of it. The other half, if you haven't seen the other half, what are you doing? I hope you all enjoyed it. I'm gonna try to push this out by the anniversary, which is July 7th. Please feel free to subscribe if you're feeling generous. You can also follow me on Instagram or Letterboxd if you want to hear more of my film takes. Nicole, where do you want the people to follow you?
Panic at the Pet Shop on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
You can follow me there.
Great. I think that's it. Any final words?
I don't think so. Thanks for having me on. I love watching movies with you.
Me too. Let's watch more movies. I have movies. Let's watch more movies.
I know you have movies. You have all the movies.
Yeah. Let's watch the Clerks animated series, 2000.
I don't know about the Clerks. Right now I'm writing a bit about Gremlins 2.
Oh, like that one smart gremlin in the movie. It's like, civilized. We just want to be civilized. Shoots other gremlin in the face.
Yeah, that's who I think about. But anyways, I'm just having empathy for those gremlins right now.
Yeah, we can talk about gremlins another time. Like, I understand the metaphor you're aiming for. You're aiming at.
I'm working on it. I'm still working on it.
We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it later.
Okay, good.
But
Good.
but yeah. Anyway, see y'all later.
Why haven't you stopped recording it?
Because I was waiting for this.
Okay.
The waving goodbye to the audience. Wave, smile, and wave, Nicole. Bye. Do the Princess Diana thing. Bye.